Hey there, everybody, what's going on? This is Too Much Food, still the host of your new nameless show, which, by the way, we are leaning towards the gaming buffet or games buffet, something like that. We're trying to keep it along the lines of food since that's in my gamer tag. You get it. Last week, I set up the foundation for this new show where you get to vote and decide what the next episode will be about. And this particular one, everybody voted for, surprisingly, the Sega Genesis. I put up the Game Boy Advance, the PSP, and the Genesis, and I figured I'd be getting a lot of votes for the Advance. And I was kind of hoping that that's where that was going because I loved it. I spent a lot of time on it. But apparently you guys want to see the Genesis, and I love this console too. So before we get into the facts of the console, I wanted to tell you my personal experience with the console. So you know that I have the know-how, the experience about it. So my first console was actually the Model 2 Genesis right here, which is, to me, what I thought at the time was the standard Genesis. When I'm a kid, I didn't know any better. My mom got me this on my third Christmas. I was 3 years old. And you may think, how do you remember that? You're 3. You don't remember much. You remember when your mother gets you a game console that creates you to be a gamer. Like, this is what made me a gamer. I didn't do much and know much about games. I didn't play them. I didn't really know about their existence until she bought me this. And it was the one that has the Genesis on the front, has the controller, and on the bottom right, it'll have a photo of Sonic and Tails, like for Sonic 2. And I played that non-stop, over and over and over. I've played it to death. I probably played it more than what people in this day and age play a game like Skyrim or Elder Scrolls Online or Destiny even. I played the shit out of that game. And when I found out there was a Super Sonic, it made the game entirely brand new to me. Like, it was insane. Sonic 2, let me say, will always be my favorite game because of what it did for me. The Genesis will always be my favorite console for what it meant to me. It was a great experience. I've played plenty of other games. I got Mortal Kombat here, which is going to fall into the story here as well. But there's other heavy hitters, but Sonic 2 was the best for myself. Now, with the console itself, there is a story. Essentially, there's a big story behind the Genesis, and it kind of like spreads everywhere. It gets kind of saturated, I guess, rather than it being, well, somebody wanted to make a console to compete with Nintendo. It's a little watered down, honestly. So the Sega Genesis was pretty much a modded board of what Sega had in arcade consoles, or arcade units, I'll say. They used the exact same board. It's a little bit modded, and the processor inside of the motherboard that had the arcade unit was the 10 megahertz processor, and then the Genesis had a 7.61 megahertz processor. So with that being said, you were able to enjoy the arcade games that you were playing, but they would be played at a lower resolution, lower sound fidelity, just to kind of accommodate that downclocking that they had to do for the console itself. Now, this was kind of Sega's premise coming into the home, was providing an arcade experience in your home, because they started to see what would it be like in a few years. Would people still come to arcades? Would people still want to spend money and not really obtain anything, not own a product? So they didn't want to be part of a future where they weren't involved in gaming. So what they did was they had one foot in one room and one foot in the other. And one room, of course, was your arcade games, and the other one was moving into the living room. So they tried to provide all your arcade experiences that they offered at home through the Sega Genesis. Now, at first, that's what sold the Genesis. People loved it, and it was a success initially. It got them into the homes. But there was a problem after that where people started to want more. They started to feel like the games were becoming too repetitive, and they're very short and easy to beat, essentially, because that's how it was in the arcades. You were meant to spend a few dollars there, hang out with your friends, get 3 buddies with you so you could play through this campaign like I did with the X-Men game. and that was it. But imagine owning that and doing that over and over. At least with the arcade, you played it every now and then, and so it retained its its richness, its experience. So it did really well in the arcades, but at home it started to get burnt out. So with that, Sega created Sonic, their main mascot, the heavy hitter, their big boy, the game that got me hooked on this console, the franchise that did. So that was kind of their answer to Mario, and also their answer to those who were expecting more. They wanted a better experience. So Sonic came out, the console blew up in a massive success. And when I say massive, I mean massive. In just 5 years, Sonic went from having 8% console market share to 56%. That's a massive increase. That's if that happened today in this day and age in the 8th gen consoles, people would already be talking about doom and gloom for whoever's in last place. Coincidentally, it would be Nintendo again, but it's something that I haven't heard of or seen again, to go from 8% to 56 in 5 years. Now, the console was doing really well. Sega wanted to keep up the experiences that they were offering people, and they didn't want people to get bored. And this is where I feel like the whole saturated part comes in. Sega, with the Genesis, I feel like they predicted the future. They had a Sega modem that you would attach to the back of this, where you could connect it online, and you could download games. You could play with friends over the internet. You could buy these games and own them and install them digitally. Yeah, digital storage on the Genesis. This old flimsy piece of plastic was able to go online way back when. I think that's them thinking of the future, and they nailed it. For those of you who love motion gaming, be it Move or with the Wii or Kinect, they had this active ring thing that you would put on the floor, and you'd plug it into your Genesis, and it would use like infrared lights to detect where you're moving, and based on like the degree of where that ring was and where you were at, it would make the character do a specific move. Like if it were a fighting game, you would kick or punch. If you would kick or punch with this ring. So they got motion gaming in back then. They have the big old joysticks for your simulators and your firefight, your dogfight games. They had those. They have your standard 3-button controls, and then they went to the 6 when they were trying to be more competitive, especially with the fighting games like Mortal Kombat here. They added more buttons because of that. They added, to keep this thing alive, moving into the future, to keep it, make it relevant, to keep it in relevancy, if that is a word, and if not, I am going to patent that. It's mine. Don't steal it. So they made the 32X attachment, which is an attachment that you put on top here. It looks like a big old mushroom cloud. That's what I think of every time that something exploded. It's like, you know, Samsung Galaxy Note 7 exploded. That's the way I see it. And it's big, wonky, clunky, but you would put it up there and it makes your 16-bit console turn into a 32-bit console. You had your Sega CD, which you would put under this, and you would have your CD games. Although there's a lot of FMV games on there, which is like full motion video games, where everything was already like decided for you, but you would just hit a button at a certain time. It's kind of like a timed event, like how we have in the 8th gen right now, these timed events where you press A or B or X, whatever console you play on. So they were trying to provide all these different experiences, all revolving around the Genesis, to make it relevant moving into the future. I mean, you had the online modem, as I mentioned, you had the 32X, you had the Sega CD on there, plus your console that you still had itself. And for those of you that didn't know, the Sega Genesis is fully backwards compatible with the Master System. Now, here's the fun thing about that. although it has absolutely everything that it needs to be backwards compatible, you can't play Master System games. You can't put a Master System game in here. It just doesn't fit. So you had to buy a whole new adapter that you put on here, and it would have the reader for your cards that were on the Master System. Then you would have the slot for their Master System game, and then you could play it. Now here's the other fun part. You can't play your Genesis games now because you have that plugged in. Like, I like to think that Sega's revolutionary, and in a lot of the ways they were, and they nailed a lot of things on the head. But to see that people would have liked to play your Master System games on this console without an adapter, and then you have to use an adapter and then sell it, and then you didn't realize that, hey, people would like to not have to switch them out, so let's make it fit Genesis games and Master System. Actually, I'm sorry. Yeah, Master System games. That's something that I feel like made lots of sense to me just thinking about it, but I don't know what went wrong. I don't know what was going on in their head or in that boardroom. So this thing, I mean, it has attachment after attachment, and there are so many models of the Genesis. It is just a saturated mess, like I said earlier. So right here, I'm gonna let my buddy Adam take it away with a clip of all his Genesis consoles and iterations that he has, and some that he doesn't. So anyways, there you go, Adam.
Sega Genesis Model 1, Japanese Sega Mega Drive Model 1, European Mega Drive Model 1, Model 2 Sega Genesis, Model 2 Sega Mega Drive European version. I don't actually have the Japanese version, but it looks like this. Model 1 Genesis with Model 1 Sega CD. Model 2 Genesis with Model 1 Sega CD. Looks weird, but will work. Model 1 Genesis with Model 1 Sega CD with 32X. Model 2 Genesis with Model 2 Sega CD. Interestingly, this is my first Genesis ever right there. You can tell because I put a little sticker on it when I was a kid. Model 2 Genesis with Model 2 Sega CD with 32X. Model 1 Genesis with Model 2 Sega CD with official extender. Model 1 Genesis with Model 2 Sega CD with 32X. Model 1 Genesis with power base converter. Model 3 Genesis, Genesis 3 with 32X. Doesn't actually work with it, so I'm not really sure why I'm showing this to you. Sega CDX, which fun fact about this thing, it is a Sega CD and a Sega Genesis all in one unit. It doesn't support RGB, which is ridiculous, and it functions as a portable CD player. I am not kidding. You can play you put your headphones there. This is how you skip your music around, and it even has battery support right there. That doesn't power the console, but it does power it as a portable CD player. Sega CDX with 32X. JVC XI, which was a Sega CD and Genesis all in one, but it also primarily focused as a karaoke device. JVC XI with 32X. Sega Wonder Mega, only released in Japan, plays Mega Drive and Mega CD games all in one, also functions as a karaoke device, and has a motorized flip top, which, what the hell? And of course, Sega Wonder Mega with 32X. Sega Nomad, a portable Sega Genesis. Yes, you could actually put Sega Genesis games in this and just play this on the go. Sega Nomad with 32X. Pioneer Laser Active, technically a competing console, but it did have a Sega Genesis and a Sega CD built into it. And for the hell of it, Pioneer Laser Active with 32X.
So as you can see, there is a lot of iterations of the Genesis. A lot. And you think that, oh, there is 2 Xbox Ones. That must be confusing for the consumer. There's PlayStation 4 Slim and the regular base model and the PlayStation 4 Pro. Yeah, that's confusing. Of course. No, like, yeah, you got to remember a few more names, but who can't remember 3 names? Who can't remember 3 consoles? With the Genesis, you had like 16 different iterations of this thing. Who could just remember that off the top of their head? Are you going to remember all of them after watching that? I doubt it. And if you do, it's really impressive, because I myself can't remember all that just off the top of my head. So the Genesis went way out of its way to get into your living room. It went way out of its way to cater to you. You had your games that were ultra violent, like Mortal Kombat with blood, and parents went crazy, but they were marketing the teens. They wanted teens to own this console. They didn't want children They held focus groups to see exactly what teenagers wanted in a games console. And after they showed them what they were doing with the Genesis and where they were going, and showing them some advertising on the Genesis, a lot of the kids who had a Nintendo system wouldn't admit that they had a Nintendo system. So these promotional materials, these advertisements, made them feel embarrassed for being a Nintendo owner and a Sega-less gamer. So Nintendo, from this point, was pretty much being barraged by Sega through ads. And this is where I think like the modern day console war happened. And this is what makes me think when people say console wars nowadays, I'm like, you don't know a console war. Because back then, all you heard was blast processing. It's so much faster. You don't want a SNES. You tired of playing your Marios? Like, they would straight up say these things. They would talk about Mario and Nintendo in their commercials. Sega does what Nintendo don't, and that forever stuck. People remember that. Look, we're in 2016. I'm talking to you about it. This is from forever ago, and it's forever going to be one of those promotional pieces where you're thinking they had attitude, they had guts, they had what it took to make it big. They wanted to be big, and they weren't afraid. They were that kind of guy that's like, you ask him, like, should we approve this here? Is this something we want to do? Rather than ending up in a boardroom for a long time, or it being something that you decide over an expansive amount of time. They were just like, yeah, man, go for it. I love it. Let's do it. One example of that is the Game Genie. The Game Genie was usable on the Nintendo, the Super Nintendo. And Nintendo hated it. They were like, I don't want this on our console. Stop making it. This is not okay. We don't like this. And Sega said, I like it. That's great. Why don't you come make one for us? And not only did they make a Game Genie for the Genesis, but Sega was actually a backer of the product themselves. Their name, the Sega logo, was on the Game Genie. So it was kind of like a FU to the face of Nintendo. They're like, yeah, whatever you don't want to do, we'll do it. Because people are asking for it, but you don't want to do it. So sure, why not? Thanks, Nintendo. So we'll get the 56% market share. And when you're sitting in your boardroom wondering why, maybe you'll look back at all the things that we did to adapt and provide gamers with the experience that they wanted. So it was a huge middle finger to Nintendo. And nothing against Nintendo. I love them. And I think their games are, second to none. But Sega, it wasn't that they were just being arrogant, like a company ran by teenagers. It was that they knew that, you should kind of listen to the group, to the base that you're trying to sell to. So they're like, not only will we listen, but we'll execute on that. So they provided all these different variants of consoles, these different iterations of certain consoles and attachments for them. When they saw CDs going a certain way, that's why they came out with the 32X. I'm sorry, the Sega CD. The 32X came out so that way it could kind of extend their success and they didn't have to move into the Sega Saturn so quickly. So things were actually looking very, very good for the Sega Genesis. And by no means was it a fluke, or was it something that was just thrown onto their lap. It was by making really good decisions. And that was with the weird system that they had for getting approval of these certain decisions. They couldn't just do things, especially Sega of America. They were always asking for permission. They couldn't just do something. They had to ask Sega of Japan for permission. And a lot of the time, Sega Japan was not happy with what Sega of America wanted to do. But to Sega of America's credit, to their credit, a lot of the things that they said they wanted to do just worked. It didn't fail. None of those things that I mentioned, except for the online device, failed. They all did very well, and it made this console very lucrative for the company and lucrative for the gamer in terms of an experience rather than, you know, income. But they did everything that they possibly could to provide a gamer with the kinds of experiences that they wanted, with family-friendly titles, with mature titles, with titles that specifically catered to the hardcore, like, teen gamer. And this is why I have this Mortal Kombat still here. It's definitely the better version. If you got the SNES and you got the Genesis and you don't have Mortal Kombat for either one, and you want to pick one up, make sure you get the Genesis one. It's by far the best one. So the Genesis is definitely something big, and either you guys didn't know about it and you wanted to learn about this, or you already knew how great the Genesis was and therefore you voted for it. But I'm excited to have these two in front of me here. I can't remember when I last had mine, but I definitely want to pick up one again in the future, because learning all this again gave me the opportunity to really appreciate my childhood even some more than the way that I remembered it, because a lot went on behind the scenes for the Genesis. For those of you who are in Europe and Japan, it's the Mega Drive. Fun fact, why it's called the Mega Drive in Europe and Japan and not in North America is because in North America there was a company, a tech company, where they had the Mega Drive name locked down. So Sega just went with the Genesis. There you go. I know that's a little late for that one, but I put this bit of information in there for one of my Twitter followers, Sobski, because he pretty much told me about it being called the Mega Drive. I told him I knew about it and he didn't know why, but anyways, there you go. So make sure you retweet this video, because I put that in there for you, man. But thanks again, everybody. I want to say thanks because you guys voted. There was a lot of votes, a lot, not even a little bit. I thought there was going to be like 4 or 5 of you that were like, I guess I have time, I'll go vote. Why not? But you guys did in droves. A lot of you did. And so I keep reminding you, it's not like because I'm in America, when you vote, it doesn't matter. Unlike the actual election, when you vote, I actually give you the thing that you want to see. So your vote matters, as corny as that sounds. So thanks again. I'm going to put up another selection on my Twitter. So make sure at the end of this video, you check out the link below this description, and I will have, again, a link to my Twitter page, so you don't have to open up Twitter or anything like that. You can just tap it. It'll take you to my Twitter, and you can see what I will have pinned for your suggestions. And then the next episode I bring to you, it'll definitely be on that, depending on who wins. So thanks again for stopping by for another show. This is Too Much Food. Please don't forget to rate, comment, favorite, and subscribe. And as always, thanks for watching.